Tonight on Ukraine Today, battlefield situation. Did the Russian occupiers really capture the first two villages in the Dnipro region? Gasoline crisis in Russia. Ukraine knocked out at least 17% of Russian oil refining. Peace deal by the end of 2025? Trump's envoy Steve Vitkoff raises the stakes. Inhuman treatment. Russia plans to leave the European Convention Against Torture. All that and more right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Subscribe, hit the like button, and let's go to the news. We start with Deep State. The site claims Russian forces captured the first two villages in the Dnipro region. It is not clear what this conclusion is based on. In any case, the Ukrainian military deny it. Defense forces report Russians tried to move forward, but were stopped. We follow the story. Bild writes, Russia's summer offensive failed. Most Kremlin goals from April to August 2025 were not achieved. The plan to build a so-called security belt in Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv regions failed. In Kherson and Zaporizhia, the line is stable. In Pokrovsk, Donetsk region, Ukrainian defense forces pushed the enemy back. In the last 24 hours, Russia lost at least 920 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, already 1,078,750 soldiers. In addition, in the last 24 hours, our defense forces destroyed one Russian tank, 45 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment. New satellite images show the aftermath of the explosions at the Elastic, that's the name gunpowder plant in the Ryazan region, Russia. Analysts write, 300 tons of gunpowder destroyed, enough for 35,000 shells of 152mm caliber. Reminder, Elastic plant was attacked on August 15th. Ukraine knocked out at least 17% of Russia's oil refining. Reuters reports strikes hit 10 Russian plants. This was a response to attacks on Ukraine's gas and energy facilities. And this means both the Russian domestic market and export are in trouble.
I want to thank our warriors for their accuracy. Ukrainian drones, Ukrainian missiles are really working well. Russian logistics, Russian fuel infrastructure, they feel it.
More on Russia's real gasoline crisis in the story.
Gasoline shortage in the country, gas stations, Russia. The official explanation for the shortage is unscheduled maintenance at oil refineries. Russian propaganda is hiding the real reason.
The line on Melniknaya, right on the road. Oh.
The fuel shortage has been felt most acutely in Zabaikelsky Krai, Primorsky Krai, and the temporarily occupied Crimea.
As I see it, there are two reasons for this fuel shortage. The first is what everyone is talking about. It's that some significant Russian oil refineries were recently hit, and this, let's say, has effectively created a profound physical shortage of essential fuel supplies, which is consequently leading to its widespread scarcity across various regions.
Since the beginning of August, Ukrainian drones have attacked Russian oil refining infrastructure. In less than 3 weeks, at least 7 of the largest refineries were affected and had to completely halt production. The first to be hit were the Ryazan and Novokuibishevsk oil refineries.
Look, it's about to absolutely blow up. Did you manage to get it all on camera?
Unbelievable! 5 days later, the Afipsky refinery came under attack.
Look, a drone just hit the plant.
On August 14th, one of the largest industry plants in Russia, the Volgograd refinery, shut down. The next day, UAVs struck the Syzran oil refinery.
There are drones flying over there. Drones, wow.
No internet connection. The entire plant is currently engulfed in a raging fire. And on the Samara news channel, we are presently watching some kind of incredibly disturbing and unsettling footage.
The very last one, occurring on the night of August 24th, was the Novoshakhtinsk refinery, which was significantly hit and impacted.
I think there's also a second reason that no one talks about publicly. But based on the experience of a similar situation in Russia that happened in September 2023, it's quite possible that this is the case. This is the cancellation of the damper. Back then in 2023, the Russian authorities, aiming to optimize budget spending, decided to reduce damper payments. The damper is a subsidy paid to fuel distributors for selling it domestically at relatively low prices.
Since the beginning of summer, wholesale prices for A95 gasoline on the Russian exchange have risen by 35%, and since the start of the year, by more than 50%, A92 has increased by 40%. Even at these high gasoline prices, there still isn't enough for everyone. People complain that fuel can only be purchased with vouchers for enterprises and special equipment.
Well, in Russia, the goal is to cut expenses as much as possible. The main reason for these expenses is waging a full-scale war against Ukraine. But Russia does not want to stop the war. Therefore, it seems to me that a decision was made to cut damper payments. Moreover, a meeting on optimizing damper payments is scheduled for early September in Russia, but most likely they decided to cut these payments even before that meeting. And as shown in September 2023, when damper payments are cut, the businesses involved in fuel sales simply hold back the fuel and don't allow it to be sold, since doing so would either result in a loss or the profit margin would not be as high as it could be.
Journalists report that the self-proclaimed head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, admitted on a local TV channel that there are fuel problems on the peninsula and predicted that there will be a gasoline shortage for another month. The sale of AI-92 gasoline has also been suspended for residents of the Kuril district, which is part of the Sakhalin region, because the entire supply there is needed for special vehicles. The situation with gasoline could be resolved by Putin's friend, the Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. However, he is in no hurry to do so.
In 2019, Russia decided to implement a tax maneuver. What did it involve? It meant that instead of an export tax on oil, a tax on oil extraction was introduced. Why is this important in the context of Belarus? Because Russia and Belarus are a union state. And by agreement, the export tax on oil that Russia collected, in the case of other countries, or rather in the case of Belarus in this context, went to the budget of the Republic of Belarus. In other words, Belarus paid nothing, and the mineral extraction tax did not go to the revenue of the Republic of Belarus. This was done for one simple reason, because Russia understood that Belarus was making money by taking raw materials from it and producing petroleum products from that oil. And for 5 years, starting in 2019 and finishing in 2024, they spent time trying to minimize as much as possible the amount of fuel produced in Belarus.
Essentially, Russia ended up facing exactly what it was fighting against. With his stubbornness, Putin continues to drive the country into a pit of shortages and high prices, and it is ordinary people who end up suffering from his actions.
Horrifying footage appeared from the Kherson-Mykolaiv highway. There, Putin's terrorists targeted civilian transport with drones. Regional head Alexander Prokhudin called on the Ukrainians not to use this road unless absolutely necessary. As we see, the Kremlin shows clearly it wants to continue the war. President Zelensky says only stronger pressure on Russia can change the situation.
This week, we will have contacts with Turkey, with the Gulf countries, with European countries that may serve as platforms for talks with Russia. On our side, everything will be maximally ready to end this war. It is important that our partners confirm this. And then, everything will depend only on the will of world leaders. First of all, the United States of America. To put pressure on Russia, we need new steps, new pressure, sanctions, tariffs. All of this must be on the table.
Meanwhile, Trump's envoy Steve Vitkoff said Ukraine and Russia will sign a peace deal by the end of 2025, maybe even much earlier. He said this to Fox News. Earlier, US Vice President J.D. Vance also spoke about 6 months to peace. Pragmatic realism or blind optimism? Write in the comments, what do you think? Belgium is ready to send troops to Ukraine. Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost said only if there is a ceasefire.
When a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire, will be decided, we are ready to take part in international force with an international mandate. That's something which is also important. I will at that time discuss within the government, and especially with my colleague, the Minister of Defense, in order to identify what kind of military support we can provide. But we are ready to be involved in such a peace force when necessary.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And now is the time to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Please share it too, so more people can watch. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. I have more information on Russia's plans to leave the European Convention Against Torture. Inhuman treatment and punishment are widespread in Russia, and now the Kremlin wants to raise these crimes to the level of official state policy. All the details in the story.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Even fewer rights for the people? Why not? Russia has begun the process of withdrawing from the Convention Against Torture or Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment.
We can certainly do it, indeed.
Prime Minister Mishustin has already signed the decree and sent it directly to Putin. But why only now?
I think that's just how things turned out. They decided the time had come. And in fact, everyone already knows and understands perfectly well that prisoners are tortured, detainees are tortured, everyone is tortured. But nevertheless, purely formally, this convention was signed and even ratified in Russia, in fact, by the State Duma.
But here's what's interesting. According to the convention, the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture has every right to come and inspect prisons, penal colonies, pretrial detention centers, and so on. But it is reported that Russia stopped responding to requests for cooperation a long time ago.
Well, look, there was a very similar and indeed comparable situation with the European Court of Human Rights. Was there not, right? Everything happens gradually, step by step. So at first, Russia stopped complying with the decisions of the European Court and then eventually left the Council of Europe altogether, right? So it's the same thing here.
Nevertheless, about 3 years ago, Eva Merkacheva prepared an entire report on the topic of torture. And she even mentioned this convention. But of course, none of the changes she requested were implemented.
I ask you to support the initiative to introduce amendments to the criminal code to create a separate article on torture. Let me remind you that there is the UN Convention Against Torture, which Russia has ratified. And in fact, we were obliged to introduce such an article. But so far nothing has happened.
People tell Putin about torture right to his face, while he just lowers that very face, as if it doesn't concern him.
She is one of the last members of this presidential council who, well, spoke the truth to Putin's face. And of course, he didn't like it. And naturally, he didn't like the conversations about torture either.
But what, at this point, gives the Kremlin a formal way out of a treaty that, in reality, hasn't been working for a long time anyway?
It's precisely a clear demonstration that, my dear friends, you are indeed under our protective care, and rest assured, everything will ultimately be fine. Just simply do exactly as you are told and instructed. And in order to fulfill our wishes, you can do whatever you want. If you need to torture, torture. If you need to kill, kill.
And this is far from the first time Russia has withdrawn from international agreements. First, Moscow withdrew from the European Convention on Human Rights, and now it's the turn of the Convention Against Torture. As a result, Russians are being deprived even of formal international protection.
Before there was at least some need to keep up appearances, right? Well, it was like you could beat people, but carefully, so there wouldn't be any marks. Torture, but not to the point of, so to speak, damaging internal organs. Put someone on a bottle, but not too deep. But now there are fewer and fewer of these restrictions. So for ordinary Russians, things will only get worse.
Russia is moving further and further away from the international rules of the game. It seems as if the Kremlin is deliberately closing its doors so that no one interferes with building its own special reality.
I would call this back to the Middle Ages, meaning when torture is allowed, and then, well, as they say, an arsenal of tools appears that can be used to carry out that torture.
Despite everything, on August 26th, Eva Merkacheva even commented on the idea of Russia withdrawing from the convention and called it quite expected. At the same time, she noted that Russian laws prohibiting torture will not be repealed. But we understand, for the Kremlin, laws have long meant nothing, neither Russian nor international.
Finally, irony of fate. There is a Putinist named Markov. He is a strong supporter of the Russian dictator and the war against Ukraine. But something went wrong. The Kremlin added him to the long list of foreign agents. How did that happen? The story explains.
The irony of fate for Russian propagandists, just yesterday you were calling to crack down on foreign agents, and today you're already putting a shameful banner on your own social media. A so-called political analyst, Sergei Markov, has been a constant presence on Russian TV in recent years, and on his Telegram channel, Markov's Logic, he has championed Putin's policies, criticized the West, naturally supported the so-called special military operation, and was quick to back the first wave of repressions.
Foreign agents, of course, need to be dealt with more harshly, and a bit more cleverly, too. We shouldn't let a situation arise like in Saltykov-Shchedrin's famous tale, where the bear just up and ate the siskin. We shouldn't be eating siskins. Well, of course, we do need to be tougher. Most importantly, they should be cut off from all our information resources, from access to the Russian audience, and from the ability to receive money. I think this should be one of the rules. If you're somehow acting against Russia, then you shouldn't be able to make money from the Russian market.
But Markov ended up sinking himself to the surprise of many, and in a rather foolish way. He failed to adapt to the cooling of relations between Russia and Azerbaijan, went to the Shusha Media Forum, and out of habit started praising the hand that feeds, in this case, Aliyev.
Because you know, he is a brilliant intellectual, graduated from MGIMO, where I also taught a bit, and without a doubt he is one of the most experienced leaders in the modern world, a leader who represents a victorious country. There aren't many countries that have achieved a complete victory in war and fully restored control and liberated the entire territory of Karabakh. And in this sense, many other leaders would like to learn from him, to know what the secret of victory is.
In Russia, which has weakened in the region after the resolution of the Karabakh conflict and has nothing to boast about in the war it started in Ukraine, Markov's flattery was not appreciated. The first to attack him were the so-called war correspondents and his longtime rival, propagandist Vladimir Solovyov, whose show has not featured Markov's expertise for 10 years.
Regarding Baku.
Yes.
Two people allowed themselves an act of phenomenal and professional human meanness. At a time when our fellow journalists are languishing in Azerbaijani dungeons.
Yes, my employees, and you can't imagine, because of this, I can't sleep. As you understand, I already have enough reasons not to sleep at night these days. Two more of our guys, my employees I am responsible, will not end up behind bars.
And so two citizens of the Russian Federation, one of whom until recently held a high position, end up in Shusha at the personal invitation of the Azerbaijani side. And they did not allow themselves to ask a question about the fate of our colleagues. They allowed themselves to gush with praise, but they did not allow themselves to ask that question. This is a manifestation not only of professional, but also of human baseness.
That's true.
Fortunately, one of them was sent into retirement. Due to age, I hasten to add. And as for the second one, I hope that a certain Markov will never again be invited to any Russian media outlet. Or let him simply be declared as an agent of a foreign state working in our country to serve their interests.
It's unclear whether this was prompted by Solovyov or not, but criticism rained down on Markov from all sides. Moreover, propagandists began to dig up dark secrets and white spots in the biography of the once popular political analyst. It turned out that no one in Russia knows where the pro-Putin propagandist activist started out.
There is no record of this address in Dubna in all directories, and he never lived with his parents in Moscow. Other details of Markov's life that he shared about himself also appeared to be fragmentary. From the age of 16 to 18, he worked as a locksmith at the Dubna machine building plant, then served in the KGB border troops. After that, he enrolled in the Faculty of Philosophy at Moscow State University, which he graduated from with distinction.
And then things only got bigger. Journalists dug up the following: Markov's daughter, who moved to Germany for permanent residence 10 years ago and now consults from Berlin on business-related environmental issues, his wife, who runs her own separate business in Bulgaria, and even an assistant, his probable lover, who gave birth to Markov's child.
The young woman is originally from Vladimir, but she moved long ago to Yabloshkova Street to an apartment that, according to Rosrista records, was purchased by Sergei Markov in 2014. We're talking about a small 3-room apartment in a panel building worth around 20 million rubles. Literally across the courtyard in the neighboring building is Markov's officially declared residence. Grivtsova is also a member of the chats for the Baltic residential complex, where Markov bought an apartment, and she uses a space at the bread factory, but not the one purchased by the political analyst, rather an adjacent one twice as large with access to the roof. Such an asset would be worth about 30 million rubles. Recently, Daria Grivtsova has been very active in public groups about rentals and investments in Dubai. From her messages, you might think she flies there as often as she goes to her dacha.
In short, the patriot and Putin supporter Markov is just like everyone else he used to shout for, except now he's been recently branded a foreign agent, and his old enemies have decided to seize the moment and are calling for a crackdown on foreign agents.
So now our national messenger Max has come under fire. There's been such a hysterical campaign against it that you realize someone must have paid for it. And what does it mean that someone paid? It means that there are still extensive networks of foreign agents operating within the country. Well, they exposed one Azerbaijani agent, but he still needs to be put in jail. We still need to check what kind of money was involved there and put him in prison. In other words, we need to finish off all these agents of influence completely.
Now Markov, who himself recently called for cracking down on foreign agents, is afraid he might end up behind bars. And he's writing even more about his loyalty to Putin and his policies. He promises to resolve issues within the law, though he's not planning to sue the state or give interviews, clearly hoping he'll get away with it.
Russian propagandists may think their loyalty to the Kremlin guarantees them a bright future. But as we can see, some of them cannot even guarantee a decent present. Such is the fate of mouthpieces of dictatorships. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.